Something important just unfolded for the Philadelphia Eagles, and if you've been paying close attention to every small move this offseason, you can feel that this front office is quietly setting up multiple possibilities at once instead of committing to just one direction. The return of Fred Johnson might not look like a headline-grabbing move at first glance, but when you really break it down, it tells you a lot about how Howie Roseman is thinking right now. This is about flexibility, insurance, and keeping options wide open heading into the draft. Fred Johnson coming back on a one-year deal gives the Eagles stability at one of the most important depth spots on the roster. Over the last 2 seasons, when Johnson has been forced into the lineup, the team has gone 8-4 in games he started. That's not something you ignore. With Lane Johnson's durability always being a conversation and Jordan Mailata dealing with injuries like the hamstring issue, having a reliable swing tackle is not just a luxury, it's necessary. And what makes this even more interesting is that Johnson initially wanted a starting opportunity elsewhere, but after 2 weeks without the right offer, he chose to return to Philadelphia. That says something about both the market and how the Eagles value him internally. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. Some fans are starting to believe that bringing Johnson back could signal that the Eagles might not prioritize offensive tackle in the first round of the draft. But if you really understand how Howie Roseman operates, it's never that simple. He has consistently shown that he prefers to draft the next wave of talent before the current stars are gone. We've seen it with Cam Jurgens coming in before Jason Kelce stepped away, and Jalen Carter arriving before Fletcher Cox's exit. So even with Johnson back, it doesn't eliminate the possibility of an early offensive line pick. If anything, it just gives them the freedom to not force it. At the same time, the Eagles made another move that has people talking for completely different reasons, bringing in wide receiver Elijah Moore on a 1-year deal. On the surface, it's a low-risk, team-friendly addition that adds depth to the receiver room, but the real conversation comes from his relationship with A.J. Brown. These two go way back to their college days, where they were not just teammates, but close friends and even roommates. There's a real connection there, both on and off the field, with each player having supported the other through different moments in their careers, including personal challenges. That's why some fans are starting to question whether this move has a deeper meaning. Is this simply about adding depth, or is it also about strengthening the environment around A.J. Brown? And if that's the case, does it impact the ongoing speculation about a potential A.J. Brown trade? There are still people who aren't fully convinced that those rumors are completely gone, even with this move. Right now, it feels like a true 50-50 situation, depending on how you interpret the front office's intentions. Meanwhile, there are still major questions on the defensive side of the ball, especially at the safety position. Despite adding players like Marcus Epps and JT Gray, there's a growing belief that the Eagles could experiment with internal options. One name that keeps coming up is Michael Carter, who could transition into a safety role despite primarily playing as a slot corner. Vic Fangio seems open to the idea, and if that happens, it creates a scenario where the Eagles might rely on a combination of Carter, Epps, and possibly rookie Drew Makuba to handle those responsibilities. And then there's the ripple effect from the addition of Rick Woolen, which gives the Eagles even more flexibility in the secondary. With Woolen helping solidify the cornerback group, it opens the door for Cooper DeJean to move around more, potentially sliding into safety in certain packages while staying active in different defensive looks. This kind of versatility is exactly what Fangio values, and it could allow the Eagles to get creative rather than chasing a big-name safety on the market. Even at quarterback, there were some interesting developments behind the scenes. The New York Jets reportedly reached out to inquire about Tanner McKee, and Howie Roseman set the price at a second-round pick. That tells you how highly they value him internally, even if a deal never materialized. Add in the confirmed trade for Andy Dalton, who comes in as a veteran presence and essentially another coach in the quarterback room, and you start to see a very intentional structure forming behind Jalen Hurts. All of this paints a picture of a team that isn't reacting, it's preparing. They're adding depth where needed, maintaining flexibility across the roster, and quietly positioning themselves for multiple scenarios depending on how the draft and the rest of the offseason unfolds. Nothing feels rushed, and nothing feels accidental. But the biggest question right now is this: are the Eagles building toward a very specific plan that we just can't fully see yet, or are they deliberately keeping everything open so they can strike when the right opportunity appears? What do you think is really going on behind the scenes in Philadelphia? And this is exactly where things start to get even more layered, because when you look beyond the surface level moves, you begin to notice how many different directions the Eagles are quietly preparing for at the same time. This isn't just about filling roster spots anymore. It's about building leverage across the entire team. Every signing, every reported conversation, every draft visit, it all connects in a way that gives Howie Roseman options instead of limitations. Take the safety situation again, because it really highlights this philosophy. Instead of forcing a big trade or overpaying for a name, the Eagles seem comfortable experimenting internally while keeping the door open for a draft solution. There have been multiple reports suggesting that Michael Carter is legitimately in the mix to compete for a starting role at safety, which might sound surprising at first. But when you consider Vic Fangio's system, it actually makes sense. He values intelligence, positioning, and versatility over just pure size or traditional role. If Carter can make that transition smoothly, suddenly the Eagles have solved a major question without spending significant assets. But they're not putting all their eggs in that basket. The possibility of drafting a safety early is still very real, and that's where the pre-draft visits become extremely important. The Eagles have already brought in several prospects for top 30 visits, and historically, this is one of the clearest indicators of their true interests. Names like Omarion Cooper Jr., Jalen Kilgore, and Vega Iwane have already been discussed, but two edge rushers that recently entered the conversation add another layer to this entire strategy. Danny Dennis Sutton stands out immediately because of his physical profile. At 6'6" and 256 pounds with impressive speed and agility numbers, he's the kind of athlete that fits exactly what the Eagles have targeted in the past. But at the same time, he's still raw, which suggests he wouldn't be an immediate plug-and-play starter. That aligns perfectly with the Eagles' tendency to develop talent behind established players before asking them to take over. Then you have Romello Height, who produced 10 sacks last season and brings a relentless pass-rushing style, but comes with concerns about his frame and run defense. Again, not a finished product, but a player with upside. This is where you start to see the pattern. The Eagles are not just looking for immediate starters, they're looking for the next wave. Players who can come in, learn, rotate, and eventually take over when the time is right. It's the same blueprint they followed for years, and it's one of the main reasons they've been able to stay competitive without going through a full rebuild. Now, shifting back to the offensive side, there's another under-the-radar detail that could end up being more important than people realize. The Eagles currently do not have a long snapper under contract. It might not sound like a big deal, but special teams consistency can make or break close games, and it's one of those positions that only gets attention when something goes wrong. With potential changes to kickoff rules and the overall importance of field position, this is a move you should expect to happen sooner rather than later. And speaking of special teams, there's also been some buzz around a potential late-round kicker option who has completely turned heads with his athleticism. We're talking about a player who ran a 4.54 40-yard dash, hit a 70-yard field goal, and posted a 45-inch vertical. That kind of profile is almost unheard of for a kicker, and while it might sound like a luxury pick, it actually fits into the bigger picture. With new kickoff dynamics in the league, having a player who can do more than just kick, someone who can create unpredictability, and becomes a real asset. At the same time, there are external factors that could impact the entire league, including the Eagles. The NFL is currently dealing with potential uncertainty around officiating, with reports suggesting the league is preparing a list of replacement referees if negotiations don't go as planned. That might not seem directly connected to the Eagles, but if you remember how inconsistent games became the last time replacement officials were used, it could absolutely influence outcomes across the season. And interestingly, the league is even considering rules that would allow backup officials to correct obvious missed calls in real time, which tells you they're already anticipating possible issues. And then there's the tush push. After all the noise last year about potentially banning it, the play isn't even on the agenda this time around. That alone speaks volumes. A year ago, it was one of the most debated topics in the league, and now it's essentially been pushed aside. Whether that's because of lack of effectiveness last season or simply a shift in priorities, the result is the same. The Eagles keep one of their most unique advantages. When you step back and look at everything together, the signings, the draft visits, the internal experiments, even the league-wide developments, it it becomes clear that the Eagles are operating with a very calculated approach. They're not chasing headlines. They're not making desperate moves. They're building layers, creating competition, and making sure that no matter how the next few months unfold, they're ready. And that brings us to the bigger picture. Because if all of these moves are connected, if this really is one coordinated plan, then the draft becomes the moment where everything comes together. The question is not just who they will pick, but which direction they will finally commit to once they're on the clock. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think the Eagles are setting up for a specific target in the draft that we're not fully seeing yet? Or do you believe they're intentionally staying flexible to react to whatever falls their way? And more importantly, based on everything we've talked about, what would you do if you were in Howie Roseman's position right now? Because the more you look at it, the more it feels like the Eagles are sitting right in the middle of a turning point that hasn't fully revealed itself yet. All the pieces are there, but they haven't been locked into place. And that's what makes this offseason so intriguing. It's not about one move. It's about how everything connects when the pressure moments arrive. Think about it. You've got depth being reinforced on the offensive line, flexibility being created in the secondary, calculated risks being taken on low cost, high upside players like Elijah Moore, and a quarterback room that now blends youth, upside, and veteran experience. None of these moves scream all in, but none of them suggest hesitation either. It's controlled aggression, and that's exactly how Howie Roseman has operated at his best. He doesn't force windows open, he waits until they crack, and then he attacks. So if the board falls a certain way in the draft, the Eagles are ready to move up. If the right veteran becomes available, they have the cap flexibility and roster structure to make it work. If internal players step up, they don't need to overspend. Every path is still on the table. Even the smaller details, like the unresolved long snapper situation or the potential addition of a unique special teams weapon, hint at a front office that is trying to eliminate weaknesses before they ever become problems. That's how you stay ahead in this league. Not by reacting late, but by preparing early. So now everything comes down to execution, because having options is one thing. Choosing the right one at the right time is what separates good teams from great ones. The Eagles have built themselves into a position where they can pivot in multiple directions. But when draft night arrives, when cuts are made, when final decisions happen, that's when we'll finally understand what this plan really was all along. And if they get it right, this isn't just another competitive roster. This could be the foundation for another serious run. And here's the part that should really grab your attention, because when you connect everything we've talked about, it starts to feel like the Eagles are quietly setting a trap. Not for one team, but for the entire league. They've built depth where injuries usually hurt the most. They've added versatility in positions that allow constant adjustments week to week. They've brought in players with relationships that strengthen chemistry behind the scenes. And at the same time, they've avoided making any desperate headline-chasing moves that could lock them into a single path. That balance is not easy to achieve, and yet that's exactly where they are right now. What stands out the most is how patient this front office has been. In a league where teams often panic during the offseason, overpaying in free agency, or reaching in the draft, the Eagles have stayed disciplined, bringing back Fred Johnson instead of forcing a bigger signing, taking a low-risk chance on Elijah Moore instead of chasing a more expensive wide receiver, exploring internal solutions at safety instead of immediately making a splash trade. These are not flashy decisions, but they are calculated